morning, everyone, and welcome back. Welcome back to the PorscheCooled Podcast. My name is Michael Barth. This is the podcast where I usually say we, but it's not going to be we today, and I'll get into that. We chat about all things Porsche. Steve is not here. Where is Steve? Steve, where are you? Steve is actually decided to make money today. He's making the money. He's making the Godivas. He's making the cash. He's making the loot. He's making all those things, so that's where Steve is today. So Steve's not here. It's just me today. We might do a slightly shorter one today. I don't know if you guys want to hear me talking for an hour, so we might do it a little bit shorter. But I was, to be honest with you, I was tossing up whether to do this podcast today or not. This is going back to, for those of you who have been with me since the very, very beginning of the PorscheCooled Podcast, you will remember that the first episodes, I don't know how many actually, the first episodes were literally just me talking to you guys. And I think they were only about 22 minutes or 25 minutes or something like that. They're only short little podcast chats, I will call them. But I wanted to do this episode today. I thought about it. I ummed and ahed about it a little bit. But then I thought, look, I like chatting with you guys. To be honest with you, my head is in a spin, and I'm going to get into that, what's happened to me last night and what's been going on. I guess I'm not going to use the first world problems thing, but, I guess it's all relative to what's going on in the world. But we'll get into that in a minute. I want to talk about that sort of stuff in a second. But I want to start with the usual things that I start with on the podcast, and I want to start with the usual thank yous and the usual shout outs. And the first shout out that I want to start with is Patreon. And as you know, Patreon is the place where you can join PorscheCooled. You can join PorscheCooled and you can support the podcast, and you can support the podcast by paying through Patreon either $2 to $10 a month. With various benefits. One of the benefits is getting a shout out on the podcast. But I want to welcome two new members this week. And the first one is Brian. Brian is, you would have known that name. That name would sound familiar, and that's because Brian is on PorscheCooled Owner Stories this week. Brian's from Silicon Valley in the US. We had a good chat. We have a particular same collector mentality. We have the similar love of watches and the love of Porsches. And I know there's a few of you guys out there, and I know a few of you guys have reached out to me and chatted about our watches and Porsches and stuff like that. But Brian has joined Patreon, so thank you, Brian. I did thank you personally, but thank you once again for joining PorscheCooled. Second member this week is DM. DM, I'm not sure where DM is located. I asked DM if he has a Porsche. He's got two. I hope, DM, you don't mind me saying this on the podcast, but he has a 997.1 2005 Carrera in black. As you guys know, I have a 997.1 2006 Carrera in silver, so that's a great car, 2005 or 2006. That's his daily. He uses it every day, he told me, and he also has a 991.2 GT3. So thank you, DM. Thank you, Brian. Thank you both for joining PorscheCooled. Thank you for supporting the podcast. Like I said, every little bit helps, and it just helps us keep talking all things Porsche. Before I get into owner stories, as a lot of you know, my Porsche is in Australia, and we have been living in Bahrain, and we've kind of not been trapped, but we've been unable to go back to Australia and visit family, visit friends, and check on our home there, etc. We booked a ticket on Singapore Airlines. And for those of you who don't know, this is not really a COVID lead-in like me and Steve have been doing in the last few episodes, but we basically had a flight. We have our flight to Australia. We always fly Singapore Airlines. We usually fly economy, to be honest with you. It's very rare that we would fly. Sometimes we fly premium, but not very often. Business is usually when we get upgraded, which we have quite a few times. We don't usually buy business class tickets for ourselves. If it's a business expense and it's included in the project or the job, then we'll get a business class ticket. But usually that's within Europe or wherever we're going for a project we're working on. Anyway, economy ticket, we booked it in March. I was waiting for it. I put a post up on Instagram yesterday. I was actually waiting for it. I just thought it's going to happen. I don't know when it was going to happen. It could have happened a day before. It could have happened an hour before. But we got the awful SMS saying that our flight has been cancelled. Interesting wording from Singapore Airlines, though. They said it was due to suspension of flights to Australia. For those of you who don't know, Australia limits the amount of flights into Sydney Airport, into all airports actually, but Sydney Airport's probably the worst, I think. And they limit the number of people on each flight. And I think it's only something like 30 passengers a flight. And this is because they don't have the ability to hotel quarantine any more people than that. It's basically based on the infrastructure for the hotel quarantining. Even though you're fully vaccinated, and we're fully vaccinated here in Bahrain, I don't know whether even Australia will recognize that. I think that's the debate at the moment. And then, so when we go back to Australia, we would have had to hotel quarantine. We knew that. It was a $3,000 charge for the first adult. My wife would be another $1,000 on top of that, so it would have cost us $4,000 just to quarantine in a terrible hotel for 2 weeks. You're not allowed to quarantine at home, and that's the crux of the problem. The main problem is that you cannot quarantine at home. It's not like the UK, where you can quarantine, you do tests, they check on you. Australian government doesn't allow you to do that. Therefore, the number of flights coming into Australia is reduced. Because of the outbreak in Sydney, they've halved that normal cap of 60. I think it's down to 30 people per flight, like I said, and I think it's a maximum of only like 300 passengers a day or something ridiculous like that. So the chances of getting bumped when you're on economy, even though you are a gold flyer with Singapore Airlines, was pretty high, and we got bumped. So last night I tried to get another flight. I hope you guys don't mind me talking about this. It's probably a bit boring since we're super talking about Porsches, but I just thought I'd lead in with this today because it is a bit of a frustration at the moment. Anyway, so Singapore Airlines, no flights. I checked numerous days, nearly every day up until December. The only thing that came up was a flight in suites, which is obviously expensive. The stupidity of the whole thing is, though, and this bit I have to blame Singapore Airlines a little bit, is that it's two legs when you fly to Australia. It's London to Singapore, then Singapore to Sydney, but it's booked as one flight. So they cancel the Singapore to Sydney flight, and they leave our other flight active. Now, I'm going to say it, how in the hell can you catch that flight when no one can go into Singapore at the moment? You cannot go to Singapore. You cannot visit Singapore. So why would they keep that flight open? It's the Singapore's national airline. They know you're not a Singapore citizen by your details in your booking. I don't understand why they would do that. I mean, you can't go anywhere when you get there. So, that's how everything's messed up at the moment. Anyway, that's my dilemma. That's what happened last night. So that sort of threw me a little bit, maybe a little bit depressed. Made me depressed because I can't get back to Sydney. I can't get back to the Porsche. There's so many things I need to do on the 911. From general services and maintenance, as you guys know, to getting the bumper repaired that someone backed into me. I've got to get that fixed. Little upgrades here and there. So there's a lot of things to do, and I just don't know how to do them. So my latest plan is to try somehow to get the 911 to Waterhouse Hamilton in Sydney, from where I live in the inner city, from our home in the inner city, to Waterhouse Hamilton, and somehow get it to them, whether or not even though there's lockdown in Sydney and you can't really travel and you're not allowed to, go outside your area, 5 kilometers or whatever it is outside your area. I'm thinking off the top of my head, if I can get Waterhouse to go pick up my car from where it's stored, take it back to their place, their service center, do the servicing on it over the next couple of months or whatever it is, and then pay for the storage there until I get back, so at least the car is sorted. I come back and the car's sorted. I know I've said this before, and it was going to be easy because Steve was going to take the car across to Waterhouse for me. Because he cannot leave his area and he lives further than 5 Ks away, and it's not essential, it's not classed as an essential service, I guess. I can't do that. The same as my, Natasha's brother, my wife's brother, he could have done it for me. He can't do it. So I'm kind of a bit stuck. I'm trying to work out a solution. It's not easy. It's not easy. I don't know how people deal with it when you've got 5 cars, 6 cars, and you've got to get things organized and you're not living in your home country. It must be, I know wealthy people that have cars all around the world. I know you have people to look after it, but even having one car at a distance when these things are happening, it's very, very complicated. Anyway, let's get into PorscheCooled owner stories this week. As I just mentioned, Brian is on our PorscheCooled owner stories, number 49 of the owner stories series. So like I said, we're getting up there. Brian is from Silicon Valley. Brian's got a 911, 2001 model, 911 C2 cab, 996.1, of course, lapis blue. He said he wasn't really sure about the color. Brian, I know you're listening, but as I said to you in the podcast, I quite like lapis blue. It's an unusual color. It's quite a rare color. I don't know if it was that rare on 996s, was it? Maybe it was, but it is a rare color, but I quite like it. That wasn't his first Porsche. His first Porsche was a Macan S, and you should listen to the story because it's the dilemma that we all go through, where we think we're going to be happy with something. We really want a 911. And I want to get into this when I start talking about the Boxster a little bit briefly in the latter part of this episode. But, we all want a 911. And sometimes I think we can compromise. And sometimes maybe the compromise is not close enough to what we want. And I think that's what happened with Brian with his Macan S. Nothing wrong with the car. Perfect example. Well looked after. Porsche certified, I think it was. Everything like that. But he eventually switched it out, and quite quickly, I'll let you listen to the story, and got a 911, which is what he really, really wanted. But yeah, I enjoyed the chat with Brian. Brian and I had a good chat about watches. There's a bit of watch chat at the end of that episode. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you do enjoy the bit of watch chat, let me know. We can always add a bit more of that into future episodes. But Brian's an avid watch collector. He collects vintage Rolex. He's had a lot more Rolexes than me, a lot more watches than me. He's also a Panerai fan. We were both wearing our Panerai when I was recording the episode, which was cool. And he's also got a Tudor, which I wanted, which I was going to get myself, the 925 Sterling Tudor. For those of you who don't know much about watches, check that one out. It's a really nice watch. For those of you who follow me on my Instagram, michael.bath, you'll realize I did get a Tudor recently, and I got the Harrods special edition or limited edition Tudor, which has got the green bezel. And I got that really because I was on the waiting list for 1 year, and it literally took 1 year to come through. The Tudor I was offered in Canary Wharf in London, and I turned it down because it was just a little bit small for me, which I say in the podcast when I'm chatting to Brian. But Brian's story is a good one. He's got a good sort of analogy, sort of correlation between Porsches and watches, between 996s and 911s. The service box, the service records of a watch kind of equals the service records of a watch. The service records of a car of a 911 kind of equals the box and papers thing when you're collecting watches. For those of you that collect watches will know what we're talking about. Good story, enjoyed it. So check that out if you haven't listened to it already. That's PorscheCooled owner stories. Number 49 came out a couple of days ago, but it's a good one. So make sure you check that out. What else? I'm just going to get through this really quickly. I just want to read out a couple of reviews. I really like how people take the effort to review us on Apple. And I know I listen to other podcasts and no one else seems to do this. I hope it's not too boring, but I just think it's just appreciation to you guys because, you give up your time to listen to the podcast for an hour. It's a lot of dedication to listen to us for an hour. I know that. And you guys listen to us every week. And, giving us a review, like I said, lets other people find us. And other people are finding us. As I've said before, the downloads of the podcast are growing quite quickly. The fan base or listener base is actually growing. So I really appreciate that. And I really do think that's down from you guys talking about it with your friends, mentioning us on social media, and also giving us these reviews. So once again, thank you for that. But I'm going to lose my breath talking all the once. Where are you, Steve? I need you to help me get through this. It's too hard without you. First review, I might not read the whole review. 5 stars, best Porsche podcast out there. I will read this one. This is from Bobby. So Bobby said, I stumbled upon this podcast when I was researching my first Porsche. Now it has become my regular Tuesday and Friday morning coffee. Must listen to. In short, it's a podcast with real people and their real love for Porsches, especially the 997. Thank you, Michael and Steve. So that's retired K9 cop. And that's Bobby. And Bobby is coming up. I know who Bobby is. And Bobby's coming up next week in PorscheCooled owner stories. It's a good one. It's another good one. I always say this, but I keep saying this, but that each owner story is slightly different. But then we have this common thread, and that's what I love about it. But that's Bobby, so he'll be coming out next week. So thanks for the review, Bobby. Much appreciated. And Brian has also left us a review. Brian's this week's PorscheCooled Owner Stories. Best Porsche podcast. This is my best Porsche-specific podcast I've found to date. The owner stories are my favorite part, as all of us owners love the community element. All of us owners love the community element of these wonderful machines. Keep up the good work, and thanks for feeding the machine. At Manuel996, which is Brian. Thank you, Brian. And like I said, reviews basically just help our podcasts get through all the noise, get through all the other podcasts out there, and get us seen, and hopefully get us up there to being one of the number one Porsche podcasts in the world. What else? Okay, Bernard. Everyone knows Bernard. Bernard has been on a previous owner stories. Bernard, you always say I give you a lot of coverage on this podcast. It's not intentional. Honestly, it's not. But Bernard, as you would know him as EBTA911, sent me this a couple of days ago, and I missed it for some reason. I knew there was one for sale. I think someone told me there was one for sale, but I hadn't seen the ad, and I hadn't seen that it's sold. All of us know if you own a 997, the pinnacle of the 997 is the GT3 RS. The GT3 RS 4.0. One came up for sale here in Australia, and I know prices of these are increasing. Anyone that listens to Spike's Car Radio will know that Zuckerman had two, which he sold both of them. I think that was a mistake. Seinfeld has them. A lot of collectors have them. The guy that sold WhatsApp to Facebook, he had a couple. I think he got rid of one recently at a Goodings auction. But one came up at Richmond's in Adelaide. Now, these don't come up very often in Australia. I don't think there's many in Australia. In fact, I think the ad said that there is 6 of these cars delivered to Australia. I don't know what the original purchase price was, but it's a 2011 997 911 GT3 RS 4.0, Series 2 manual, only 9,000 odd kilometers, so 6,000 odd miles. Carrera white, black and red interior trim. 6 Australian delivered cars. So we all know the 4-liter is the Boxster 6-cylinder engine. I think it's like sub 4 seconds, 0 to 100. It's just such a collectible car. You know what I mean? I still think, in a collection, if you want, for me, this car, the 911R, maybe even the Spider, the 918 Spider, are so like iconic sort of 3-car, rich Porsche collection. I think that's how I see it. But anyway, the main point about this, and Bernard sent it to me, EBITDA, is that it's sold for 1 million, almost 1.1 million Australian dollars. Now, I don't know what the prices are in Europe, UK, US at the moment. I'm guessing this is pretty close to the mark. It could be more expensive. I think that I did the comparison, the conversion. 1.1 million Aussie is about 805,000 US dollars, 585,000 pounds, and 681,000 euro. So that's what it sold for. It's a rare car to see in Australia. Apparently, it didn't last very long. I think Bernard said it only lasted for an hour. I think on other articles that I've read, people said it was there for a couple of days. No matter what, it's sold pretty quickly. It's a serious collector's car. I'm sure the person that bought it has got other Porsches, has got other collector cars. I'm sure it's slipped into their collection, and it's something they probably will not let go of. It'd be interesting to see, though, in the next 5 years or so, what this car sells for. Okay, so just before I get off the values thing, I just wanted to bring up, last week we were talking about GT3 values, and James at Porsche Platz in Sydney, in South Australia, I should say. No, not South Australia, in Melbourne. Sorry, James. James from Porsche Platz in Melbourne. James had put a thread on Porsche Forums Australia with the prices of GT3s, like where he saw the estimate markets. He was looking for one. He has found one since then. And I thought it was pretty much spot on. I just want to do a shout out and just tell you guys what Simon told me. Now, Simon, you might remember his name. That's Simon is Porsche Nut 9, who was on a previous owner stories. And Simon said to me that he thought that James was pretty close to being right. Simon, I hope you're okay with me reading this out, but I thought it was quite interesting. He thought that James was a little bit off the mark on the 996.2 GT3. Simon thinks that the Mark IIs are still fetching more than the Mark Is. But the reason why he thinks prices still look low on the 996 Mark IIs is that they really don't come up. He said hardly have come up in Australia in the last 3 to 6 months, which is true. They never really come up on the on car sales, as we keep mentioning, the Australian car site, and they don't come up on other forums as well. He says they sell pretty quickly, the 996.2s. He said that he thinks the 996 Mark II GT3 is on par with the 997.1 GT3 price. So that's interesting. I always thought, and I said this when we were talking to Steve last week, I always thought the 996.2 GT3 was worth more than the 0.1. And I thought that because the improvements on the Mark II to the Mark I, people really appreciated and people wanted. The Mark I, as I see it, or as I've interpreted from other people's articles and other people's posts, etc., was the Mark I 996 GT3 was always a rawer sort of car. It was more, it was simpler and rawer. That's what I've read. I don't know if it is or not. I haven't driven either of those cars. I think what happens with Porsche is pretty much what happens all the time, is when there's an update, people think the 0.2 is always better, and people will always go with the 0.2, as in the 991.2 GT3. Of course, the 991's a different scenario because the 991.1 GT3 had the engine issues, which had the E, F, and G engine. If you know all about that, you should. People say avoid the E and F and try and get a G. Other people have F and had no trouble. People have had Fs and they're blown up. E's are blown up, and most of the E's have been replaced by Porsche under warranty. That's a different sort of scenario, though, with the 0.2. But I think in general, people like the idea of 0.2, and I think 0.2s tend to fetch better prices. 997.2 Carrera fetches better prices, but then that's because the 0.1 has the IMS issue. 0.1s, first generations of 911s, usually have a few kinks in them which are worked out in the 0.2 generation. As Nick Murray on YouTube says, always avoid the first model year of a new 911. There's always issues. I don't know if that's always true, but it seems like, the first generation of 911s, there are some sort of things they need to sort of work out, mechanical issues or cosmetic things that are fixed later on, like the air conditioning buttons and things like that in the 997 and the 997.2. They changed because they changed the color and they worked out the issues with the plastic. So I don't know. So I always thought that the 0.2 GT3 was worth more than the 0.1 for that reason alone. But I think what happens with Porsche, and this is what I was getting to, and I'm starting to lose my train of thought, I think eventually collectors start looking at the first gen of cars. They start looking at the entry of the cars. And I know Magnus Walker always says this. He always likes to buy the first year of a car. But I don't know whether it's the first year of a car, but I think there is something to collectors that they start looking at first generation of a car, first generation of the 997 or first generation of the 996, and especially when you get into these GT cars, and I think that's what's happening now. I think the 996.1 has gone up for that reason. But I think Simon is also correct. In Australia, there's not that many. I don't think that there doesn't seem to be as many 0.2s. Maybe there is, but they don't come up very often for sale, and people hang on to them. So the true value, there's no market value. It's like when you're buying a house or an apartment and you're trying to get it valued by the bank. They want to know other values of similar apartments in the building you bought in or the street. If there hasn't been any sales, well, then it's hard to pinpoint that value, isn't it? It's hard to pinpoint the actual true market value if there's no records, if there's no data. Where was I? Anyway, that was just an update on that from last week about the 996 and 997 values of the GT3. I just want to do a site that was sent to me. And this was sent to me from David in Australia. David, I know you're listening. Thanks for that link and thanks for sending it through. David's got a GT3 Touring in Australia, very beautiful car. He sent me a link from this site, and I don't know whether you, the listeners in Australia, have been to this site before. I've never heard of it. It's called chrometemple.com. chrometemple.com. There is a beautiful 911T for sale on that site at the moment, and that was the car that David sent through to me. The 911T is in, I'm not a big fan of red. This one's in Sydney, actually. It's for sale in Sydney. It's a 911T. It's a 69 911T. It's in a burgundy type color. I don't know what the name of the color is. It's got 68,000 miles. It's left-hand drive, manual, 6-cylinder, 2.2, of course. Burgundy. The color is burgundy. I thought it had a more special name than that, but apparently it is burgundy. Comes with a toolkit. It's quite a good site, though, the way it's laid out. Even if you're not in Australia, go and check out that site because it's quite a beautiful car. It's chrometemple.com. But it's a 911T manual restored left-hand drive. It's at 110,000 Aussie dollars at the moment. So that's pretty cheap for you guys in US and Europe. It's got 21 hours left. I don't know if there's a reserve on this car. There's been 10 bids. But like I said, this is an auction site I haven't seen before. They also seem to have like storage and automotive butler and things like that on this site. I'm not quite sure. I haven't really looked at the site properly, but the way they list their ads is quite good. It's got the highlights, it's got the equipment, it's got the 15-inch Fuke wheels, it's manual, it's black seat vinyl trim. What has it got? 2 keys. It comes with a pre-purchase inspection and PPSR certificate, so it shows you whether it's not been stolen or written off, etc. And they'll store it for you if you don't have storage temporarily, or I guess not just temporarily, they'll store it for you. 5% premium if you buy it at the auction, so that's not too bad. But anyway, if you're looking for a 911T, I know I'd love to have one if I had the money. Go and check that out because it is still for sale for the next 21 hours. In fact, when this podcast goes live, maybe it's already sold. In fact, it probably would be. So that's pointless. Sorry about that. It's probably already gone. But anyway, go and check out the site and see what it's like. Maybe it hasn't sold. Maybe there was a reserve and it's still going to be up on there. So like I said, Steve's off making money. He's in Sydney making money. And it's just me today. So if you've just joined the podcast and you're wondering what this person is talking to themselves, usually this podcast is me and Steve, my mate in Sydney that has a GT3. You guys have been here for a long time, know what I am talking about. The Boxster. I don't really want to spend too much time on this. Like I said, we're going to have a slightly shorter episode today. But the Boxster, I guess I've been thinking about the Boxster, and I've been thinking about the Boxster because all of a sudden, everything you seem to be reading, watching is about the Boxster, the Boxster, the Boxster. And it's usually about the 986. We all know the problems of the 986 Boxster are similar to the problems of the 996 Boxster. If you hate the headlights on the 996, 911, then you're probably not going to like them on the Boxster. Most people have got over that. The early models had the amber indicator. The new ones, the later models were all clear. The early Boxsters were 2.5 for the standard, and then they went up to 2.7. Most people say get a Boxster S. I know a lot of people that I've seen in Porsche clubs and seen images on other Porsche clubs around the world. A lot of people use them on track days, the Boxster. I mean, it's a good track car, mid-engined. I noticed Magnus Walker just did a video, which I watched part of it. I haven't watched the whole thing on that Next Big Thing series that he does on Haggerty, where he's talking about the 986 Boxster. I think he did mention that he was interested in one. He's not a real big cabriolet convertible type guy. So guessing that's probably something that's made him hesitate. But, the Boxster is an interesting one, and I have been thinking about it. And those of you who have followed the podcast for a long time know that I want a 912. Of course, if I could stretch my purse, if I had the extra cash at the moment, or the extra cash in 12 months or 2 years, I would love to get a 911T, but the T prices are quite expensive. That's why I thought that T in Sydney was quite a good one. If it stays around that 130,000 Australian dollar price, it's quite a good one. I think it'll go for much more than that. But the thing about the Boxster is, and it's very weird, and I think I'm sort of thinking back to Brian from this week's Owner Stories, who bought the Macan. And, almost straight away he realized what he really wanted was a 911. And that's probably the worst thing to happen to you when you buy your first Porsche or your first car, no matter what model it is that you think, damn, I should have bought something else. I've spoken to you guys before on this podcast and was chatting to Steve about it a couple of weeks ago, that when I bought the Peugeot 206 that I bought, I kind of had that feeling as well, like, I shouldn't have bought this car. I rushed in too quickly. I bought this car and then I got rid of it. And, that car was the same thing for me. I could relate to what Brian was saying because the same thing happened to me. And that Peugeot I kept for only a few months and I bought it brand new. But, the Boxster is an interesting Porsche. It's an interesting Porsche, as we know, because it is not always considered a true Porsche, which I think it's losing that description as the 996 lost the ugly description. I don't think people look at the Boxster in the same way. I think the Boxster is basically, you have to see it, and I think this is how the general perception is changing. And of course, we change our perception if other people agree with us. We do that as humans. It's kind of human nature, but, the Boxster is a fun car. It's a very inexpensive car at the moment. It can be reasonably inexpensive to upkeep. It does have issues, IMS, RMS, etc., similar to 996 and 997. But with anything, if you get a reasonably well-sorted one and you do the precautions, I don't see how that's going to be something that hangs over your head. I'm looking at them because, as I said on previous episodes, I think, my wife wants to learn to drive. She'd prefer to learn to drive on a manual. In Australia, if you learn on a manual, you can drive manual and automatic. To my knowledge, if you only learn on automatic, you're not allowed to drive manual. Your license is classed as automatic. It never used to be like that. When I got my license, it wasn't like that. You could learn on an automatic and you could drive a manual, which is what a lot of people did because they didn't want to learn on a manual because it was too hard. So they literally learnt on an automatic and then drove a manual. I learnt on a manual because, the cars we had were all manuals at the time. But that's why I'm looking at Boxsters. I'm looking at Boxsters. I'm looking at 986. Steve thinks keep clear of the 986. He thinks there's too many issues with them. He's heard Matt Farah talk about all the issues and they're a nightmare. Apparently, Magnus Walker said that he quite liked it. He thought they weren't hard to maintain, which is completely the opposite to Matt Farah on the Smoking Tire podcast, who said they were a nightmare. I think Ajmal made a video, or Ajmal was saying, Ajmal's at Flat Cap Driver. If you haven't been to his YouTube channel, go over there and give him a follow and say hello. But Ajmal at Flat Cap Driver, who owns a 912 and a 996, I think he was talking about as well that he was on the hunt for one. I don't know whether that's still happening, Ajmal. I haven't spoken to you about it, if you are or not. But the thing about the Boxster is, you can cross-shop it and you have to, I think, what am I trying to say? You shouldn't shun the Boxster. You shouldn't shun the Boxster thinking because I have to have a 911. I think that's what I'm getting to. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you want to get into a Porsche today and you only have X amount of money, which, let's be honest, I'm looking at Australian values and I'm looking at the top end of the 986s, and I think the 986s have gone up about $7,000 in the last 6 months, 7,000 Australian dollars. I found a really good one on car sales in Australia, which is a grey, the seal grey Boxster S. I'm only looking at Boxster S. If I was going to buy one, I would buy the Boxster S, and I would buy 2004 onwards because 2004 onwards has the glass rear window. I wouldn't be fussed with the mileage that much. I think if it's somewhere around, if it's under 100,000 or close to 100,000 I think that's okay. That's what I would be looking for. But I think you have to be really careful when you do this, because if you're someone who's listening that doesn't have a 911, doesn't have a Porsche, and you're thinking, okay, I really want a 911, but maybe I should just get a Boxster, it'll be just as good. You have to be pretty sure you want the Boxster. I think if you want it and you get into it, I don't think it's going to be a disappointment. But if you're always, as Porsche enthusiasts, we're always hankering for something else. We're always looking for something else. So I think it's a hard decision for someone getting into the Porsche range for the first time. It's hard in that it's tempting because they're cheap. And, they vary in price from really bad examples to good examples. And the range is quite a lot. The range is quite large. And I think even in Australia, it's like high 20s to high 50s for a 986, mid 50s for a 986 Boxster S. So the prices differ quite a lot. They vary quite a lot. I think the Boxster is a great second Porsche for people that already have a 911. And I know there's been a few people on owner stories who have done that. I also, there's people on owner stories like Jeff who just wanted a Boxster, and he bought the Boxster and he loves it. And that's when you have to do it. When you really know that I've always wanted a Boxster, I'm going to buy a Boxster. It's going to be a great car. If I can get a 911 in a couple of years, perfect. But I really want a Boxster. I think you'll be very happy with it. And I think if you already own a 911, like someone like me, I'd love to get one for my wife because I love to drive it as well. I think it'd be fun to have an open air experience every now and again in a Porsche. It'd be a different experience to the 997, and I think it would be great. Now, for me, it's a little bit different because, as I said, my wife likes the 986. She likes the Boxster. If I was looking for a car to go with the 911, it may not be a Boxster. Or should I say, it doesn't necessarily have to be a Porsche. I was listening to Spike's Car Radio very early this morning, the new episode with Jerry Seinfeld. And Jerry Seinfeld's talking about how he's a Porsche guy, and here he is, he's bought a Morgan, and he's going to buy another Morgan. And I thought that was pretty cool, actually. I liked how he said that because it's, I don't know, maybe someone like him, it's different because he's had so many Porsches, he just wants a different experience. But I think, if you were looking for a fun track car, say, to go alongside your 911, 997 911, 996 911, or 991 911, or even air-cooled 911, and you just want a fun car, I think, I talk about in watches, I talk about Panerai, the Italian watch brand, coming back. Now, Panerai was huge in early 2000s. It probably peaked in about 2004, 2005. You couldn't get their watches. Limited editions would sell out straight away. They'd be, crazy prices. Now you can get bargains in Panerai. And I think it's the time to buy Panerai at the moment. If you're looking for a watch, I would buy a Panerai because I think it's great value, and I don't think you lose money. And it's a great watch to wear. They're big watches, but they're a great watch. I kind of see, and we've talked about this with Lotus before, and I kind of see Lotus a little bit like this. This feeling that's coming through about Lotus, the thing with Jensen Button and the Radford Lotus that's been talked about, and they're pushing all over the place, this new Radford Lotus. I think it's going to bring Lotus back into the forefront a little bit. I know Jason Camisa has a Lotus Elise, and this is what I'm getting onto. I think the Lotus Elise is actually a pretty important car when people are cross-shopping Boxsters. Now, this may not be the person who wants a Porsche. If you haven't had a Porsche and you don't own a Porsche, then you probably wouldn't look at the Lotus Elise because you want to get a Boxster or you want to get a 911. But I'm trying to talk about people like us that already have a Porsche. You know what I mean? Like if I had the 997 and I had a 912 and I just needed something that wasn't expensive, that was a fun car, that maybe you could do track work in, yeah, you might look at a Boxster. But I think you would also look at the Lotus Elise. I've been looking at them. They're not that expensive. They're very raw. I see them in London all the time, of course. I think there's something that you have to keep your eye on. I think being a car enthusiast and being into cars like we all are, there's something appealing about that little Lotus. It's because it's so stripped out. Yeah, it's only a small engine, but there's no weight. And apparently they're quite fun. I don't know about reliability. I don't know that much about them, but I was just thinking about it today when I was, yesterday actually, when I was exercising, that it's not a bad alternative, It is not a bad alternative. I don't know if the reliability is the same as Porsche. It's probably not. But, as a fun, open top type car that you could enjoy on the road and possibly do track days with, I think it's not a bad one. Anyway, I think the Porsche Boxster is, like I said, for me, I want my wife to have that. I want her to enjoy that. I wouldn't buy a newer one, but the 986 I think is a great one to have, and it'll be a great car for us, both to enjoy. Of course, that's not going to happen straight away. Those of you who know me know that most of my funds were used up recently on a property, so I don't really have the funds to buy a car at the moment. I'm trying to be really, really sensible. I know there's some people in the background laughing, saying, but didn't you just buy a new watch, Michael? I said, yes, I did buy a new watch, but I don't know what it is about watches. I find it like a small purchase. It's like it just satisfies the need. It satisfies that need for a little while, a few months. So that was the good side of that. Unfortunately, I'm in Bahrain, and the problem being in Bahrain is I have a good relationship with the Rolex AD here. So I've already been in to see them, and that could be that could be trouble in the weeks to come. Anyway, like I said, I'm still in Bahrain. We go to Dubai actually in the middle of the month. I'll try and keep the podcast up during that time. It might be a little bit difficult, but I'll let you guys know what's happening. More owner stories to come. If you want to be on owner stories, you just reach out to me and send me a DM on Instagram, michael.bath, or at PorscheCooled. Give us a follow when you're there. If you want to come on here and talk about your Porsche. I've got some good ones coming up. I have someone from Australia who I'm not going to mention who reached out to me a while back. I didn't get back to them. They're just about to get delivery of a new car. They haven't told me what it is. So we're going to hold off that episode until they get their new car, which is apparently pretty special. So that's going to be a good one. And it's also related to a previous owner's story. So I think that will be quite enjoyable for you guys when it comes out. I know I'm being very secretive here, but I thought I'll just let you guys know there are some good owner stories coming. And on the owner stories note, I just want to say, and I know that Ajmal, when I was in London, said to me that I should celebrate the 50th episode of Owner Stories and do a special one. But I tell you what, I haven't done that. Next week is the 50th episode. I wanted to keep Owner Stories like it's always been. It's been about you guys. It's been about us guys as just normal Porsche owners, Porsche enthusiasts. Some of us might have a little bit more money where we can have one or two or three. Some of us have got one. Some of us are trying to get one. You know, some of us have a base 997, some of us have a GT3, some of us have a Boxster, some of us have a 912, some of us have a 964. It doesn't matter. The enthusiasm is still there. It's just about you guys, about your story, and about just, Porsche passion, and that's what it's always been about, owner stories. So I haven't done like a special edition, Ajmal was saying I should do a special episode talking about my story. You guys have heard my story. I tell you pretty much every episode what's going on. I haven't really owned a lot of cars over the years, and that was primarily because I lived in the city and I used to pretty much walk everywhere. So I didn't have the ability to have a lot of parking. So all my cars were a little bit later in life, by choice though. But anyway, next week's Owner Stories is number 50, and I think it's a really good one, and that's Bobby, who's going to be on next week. And I thought it worked out to be, and I said to Bobby during the episode that the way he's got to his Porsche, I think is fitting that it's the 50th episode, because it's about keeping the dream alive. It's keeping the dream alive and getting to that goal. And even if you go through other cars that you buy and sell to get there, you eventually get there, or you have that special Porsche fund, as we've heard on previous owner stories. You have that Porsche fund, and you make your dream reality. And I think that's what's great about owner stories. It's just hearing people achieve their goal, get their dream, and get in their dream Porsche. And I think that's what it's all about. So that's what I was going to say. 50th episode next week. And like I said, we couldn't have got there, guys, without you guys listening to us and all the support over the last, must be over 12 months now. I'll be doing the Owner Stories series, almost 12 months. My voice is going. I think I might leave it there. Let me know through Instagram what you think about the Boxster. Do you think the Lotus Elise is a good cross-shopping car to the Boxster? Do you think that people will look at both of them when they're looking for that sort of car? I don't know. I can just see the comparisons. And like I said, I think Lotus is a bit undervalued at the moment. And I think if you get into an Elise, I think XEs are a bit expensive though in Australia. But I think if you get into an Elise, I think you've got probably a good little investment there. I think they're a bit undervalued. I think if this Radford Lotus thing happens gets really strong with Jensen Button and the other guy, I can't remember his name. If that gets really strong and they do more stuff and Lotus gets in the forefront, and then you've got that new Lotus, whatever it's called, I can't remember what it's called, the last of the internal combustion engine Lotuses, because Lotus are going full electric too, remember that. So that could be a reason why you get into it. And I guess I'm talking about the Lotus because I'm talking about collecting things here. I'm thinking about this collecting mindset after talking to Brian with watches and cars and how, we love Porsches, but sometimes, you can look outside of Porsche. You can still look outside on the boundaries and see cars that complement the Porsche that you own. It may not necessarily satisfy the need if you haven't got a Porsche yet, but if you have a Porsche, it's about those cars on the boundary. For me, as you know, I really like the Dino GT4, like David in New Zealand's got. I would love David's car. It's a beautiful car, that yellow Dino. But it's those cars on the boundary that you have your Porsche blinkers on, but you can still see. You can still see. And I think that's a good thing. And you have to be open-minded, and you have to be open to other options, I think. I think that's the most important thing. But our passion, as you know, is Porsche, and that's where it is in general. All right, my voice is going. Thanks, guys. I hope you're still here at the end. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Like I said, sorry for it just being me this week. Steve unexpectedly couldn't make it last minute. So like I said, instead of not giving you guys an episode, I thought I would just chat one-on-one. All right, I think that's about it for today. Thanks for listening to the PorscheCooled Podcast. Bye for now.